Birth certificate fraud, Clausula Rebus Sic Stantibus, by humanity. Attention, lawyer, judge, government agent, employee, police, common man, etc. at all. Any all who serve as a fictional legal name, title, identity, pronounced phonetically. Example, leg, L, enemy, NME, tit, L, Luciferian character in the legal world reality. Authors note what the author is defined as anyone who uses these words as theirs, where truth cannot be copyrighted, merely shared by agreement. And these words are theirs regardless of who wrote the words ab initio, where truth belongs all in conceptual, heart and mind written causal, not the physical written form effectual, where this writing is written, spelled out in language understandable to both those in and out of the legal name, fraud, profession, reality, where the common understanding of this fraud and crime against humanity and creation is visible both in layman's and legal terms, not to be confused by the intent of the reader, where the authors, the intentions thereof therein, intentions are crystal clear, i.e., legal world wranglers and twisters of hearings, were dispelled out henceforth herein with all potentials of phonics deceptions, hereby and therefore removed ad infinitum. For example, a phonics deception is where one thing is spoken by a non-bar member, general public, any all legal name users without bar affiliation permissions, only to be respelled differently by any all bar members under assumption and presumption to corrupt the original intent of the one speaking, versus spelling it out, and why a fraudulent, by deliberate design, legal name non-bar member has no voice in the legal dead reality. In other words, one's words spoken cannot be altered from the speaker's original true intent as to what they mean versus what the one hearing the spoken form of the words hears, and then corrupts them and their spoken words by using alternative spellings under assumption and presumption of the same sound homonyms, with completely different definitions, using this spelling trickery to undo them and gain the honor advantage where no honor in them exists, and the non-bar member is rendered in a state of perpetual dishonor unknowingly, i.e. twist them. The non-bar member speaking their spoken words, spoken backwards, around, opposes, negates, corrupts the speaker's original intent to initiate and perpetrate, instigate fraud against them, to enable imaginary crimes, to profit from statutory commercial rape, kidnapping, etc. at all. Thus why court proceedings are called hearings, where spellings is a more precise term for what's really going on. Thus, this is spelling it out clearly, where assumption and presumption is rendered null and void, where any all use claiming to be a legal name entity has everyone the original sin, sign, state of fraud, from the creation of and continued use of the legal name that appears in every birth certificate until they remove themselves from the criminal legal reality, where anyone involved in the enforcement of this fraud using violence, trickery, coercion, etc. at all, to ensnare with intent to enslave another is, in fact, aiding and abetting a criminal act by forcing another into submission to its use, where this truth has been exposed and where it is legal to use any all legal names, titles ab initio. A typical courtroom drama example: unwitting legal name deaf and ant would be mind, deaf mind. I do not consent, spoken with the intent of no wish to consent. Intended where the bar member, aka judge, lawyer, cop, etc., can and will assume, presume in full honor the words phonetically as to how they want to hear it, and is respelled that verbal for bail. I do not consent, where I means yes, affirmative, and tacit agreement instantly. Do is in debt, tacit agreement. Not is in tied and bound, tacit agreement to slavery, and con means both with, for, and against without equally as a prefix. Also means thief or criminal in common vernacular terms, etc. Se is Latin for himself, herself, itself, which is the entire essence of the speaker involved, and ent is a suffix meaning mind etymologically. In short, the ones perpetuating and profiting from this legal name fraud deception can hear whatever they choose to hear, and can will in full honor respell every word uttered at every hearing because it wasn't spelled out by the speaker in writing, where it can be respelled by the bar members' criminal intentions to incriminate all innocent and guilty individuals equally, thus painting all humanity with the same criminal brush they've been painted with, and simply passing the buck to make a buck of sin sign to another, rewriting by respelling the speaker's words against them to create the bar member servant by oath advantage every time. In every legal reality situation, this deception, ruse, criminal enterprise is over, where truth itself is all the vengeance one needs in a white flag state of truce, not surrender stance, and where all criminals perpetuating this crime against humanity are now fully exposed for all to see. It's illegal to use a legal name is a legal fact. Clausula Rebus Sic Stantibus, as it pertains to birth certificates, any all contracts, treaties, hereafter shown spelled as cross or in full, commonly referred to as the escape clause. In legal public international law, Clausula Rebus Sic Stantibus, Latin for things thus standing, is a legal doctrine allowing for treaties contracts to become inapplicable, nunc pro tunc, where any all fraud revealed renders any all contracts null and void, ab initio ad infinitum, nunc pro tunc pro nunc. Now for then for now, eliminating all time periods relating to the contract's existence in the first place because of a fundamental change of circumstances, whereas it's illegal to use a legal name, birth certificate, name, title, where the intent to create a fraudulent third party is evidenced in any all birth certificates by the very existence of the birth certificate as self-evident. Cross is essentially and fundamentally proposed as an escape clause that makes an exception to the general rule of pacta sunt servanda, promises must be kept, thus removing all previous assumptions and or presumptions any all parties, legal and or otherwise, to the contrary where this fraud is revealed. Because the doctrine poses the risk to the securities aka money of treaties contracts, or those profiting from this by design fraud by exposing this intent to commit fraud and those perpetuating it as its scope, is relatively completely unconfined without borders. It requires strict legal regulations as to the conditions in which it may be invoked, where only those claiming to be legal identities within the legal reality confines are concerned, and where one is no longer deemed a legal identity thereafter, since this is the last legal act in the common sense of the definitions of one who was formerly deceived by the legal name birth certificate fraud, what is now known to be fraud, and where the ones invoking this clause, invoking this clause no longer wishes to commit legal name fraud, any crimes against another whatsoever, while removing all traces of the former identity from theirs and everyone else's reality, regardless of the aiding and abetting attempts of, by, for, and fraud by various Crown Corporation agents to elicit force, demand, coerce, etc. at all, anyone all who have stated and shown otherwise. The doctrine is part of customary international law, but is also provided for in the 1969 Vienna Convention on the Law of Treaties under Article 62, Fundamental Change of Circumstance, although the doctrine is never mentioned by name. Article 62 provides the only two justifications of the invocation of Rebus Sic Stantibus. First, that the circumstances existing at the time of the conclusion of the treaty were indeed objectively essential to the allegations of the treaty, subparagraph A, and the instance wherein the change of circumstances has had a radical effect on the obligations of the treaty, subparagraph B. In short, the intent to commit, aid, and abet fraud falls squarely on those perpetuating this legal name birth certificate fraud. Typically, anyone anywhere is being forced to enlist and press into service unwillingly, unknowingly their child through registrations of any all forms ab initio, until dissolved or remains intact willingly by any all who continue to be guilty in their own fraud by willfully using any all legal names, titles after the fact, where fraud absolute is self-evident, where this birth certificate fraud is in plain view. If the parties to a treaty contract have previously, currently, contemplated, known all facts regarding the treaty contract, based on a full and open disclosure from all parties involved in the birth certificate BC contracts, for the occurrence of the changed circumstance, the doctrine does not apply and the provision remains in effect even though the full disclosure of the fraudulent intent of the birth certificate is a legal fact and is fully exposed, a known legal fact, within the confines of the fictional legal reality, whereas those continuing to use said treaty contract, birth certificate, legal name, identity rendered this escape clause null and void by of their own hand and doing, for willfully, knowingly continuing its use after the fact, i.e. contempt of court, profiting from the veils of crime, etc. et al. Clause Rebus Sic Stantibus only relates to changed circumstances that were never contemplated by one or more of the parties, since one or more of the parties involved to initiate force and force fraud after the fact, such contracts, treaties is knowingly, unknowingly, ignorance is no defense, by, of, for, and omission commission, committing fraud with intent, regardless of claims made otherwise by any all who are legally dead, fictional identities, bar members, crown agents, etc. at all, using this fraud to steal the life source of another in any way, shape, or form. Although it is clear that a fundamental change of circumstances justifies terminating or modifying a treaty contract, i.e. the birth certificate contract is deliberately set up to deceive the gifting party, male, female, creators of physical child, children, intellectual, spiritual names, with intent to transfer the living child, children, gamete intrafallopian, into a dead legal name's ward of admiralty state, placing all contracting parties in a state of fraud absolute. Collectively, a unilateral denunciation of a treaty is prohibited to any all legal name fraud participants, i.e. legal participants without bar Crown Corporation member permissions, where the Crown Corporation agent's servant's intent to commit fraud is self-evidenced by the very existence of registration, hospital, etc. at all offices, trading in birth certificates, slavery. It must be done only on an individual choice basis to make this fraud known to any all Crown agents or remain unknowingly fraudulent by the nature of the legal name constructed reality willing participant. Any all legal name fraud parties do not have the right to denounce a treaty unilaterally, i.e. on behalf of everyone involved, where a non-legal individual can, to expose, and which exposes this fraud for all of humanity to see, where humanity must make its own choice individually, where the birth certificate is unilaterally deemed fraud upon all humanity notwithstanding. As a fundamental flaw and mistake of all legal proceedings, It is a legal fact in the legal reality fictional existence that it is legal for anyone, everyone outside of a bar card in which one must already be in fraud to enter law school using a fraudulent legal name as one example of fraud on fraud regardless, or sworn oath using a fraudulent with permissions granted only to titles attached to legal names likewise, to serve the owners operators of the fictional Crown Corporation by willful and knowing unknowing omission commission of fraud absolute. Consent to be, act as, lay claim to, act in the role of, etc. at all, a legal name, legal entity, legal character as it appears in any all books of the registrar, registration, registry, equals dead crown family identity tree, whereby any all legal names, titles, designations, ranks, corporations, etc. at all are in fact property of the Crown Corporation and use thereof without clear and explicitly present permissions by the legal owner or representative thereof, by and for said such owner of all such said legal creations, is illegal in every way, rendering such user in a state of instant dishonor in the eyes of the court, yeses of the court, a fraudulent felon criminal, regardless of the nature of any all accusations made by any all Crown Corporation representatives, bar card, sworn oath or not, since they are in the commission of a fraudulent act, i.e. Kaffir accounts, bonds, etc. Here in this doctrine it is spelled out for the reader receiver clearly, and their lack of understanding this doctrine renders them incompetent. Thus everything they take is a mistake ab initio, where fraud was as the intent of legal names fraud ad infinitum, and obviously a criminal mind heart is incapable of rational thought, where reasonable being, insane, simply looks for every reason under the sun to escape their own responsibility. Via legality is not reality, legal means, and their complicitness in these crimes against creation and truth until they decide otherwise. Simply put, criminals, destroyers of humanity, destroyers of life itself. In short, it's legal to use a legal name, any all legal references aforementioned, regardless of claims made to the contrary by any all legal agents to the contrary, where legal agents is defined herein as anyone who uses any all legal definitions of who and what they think they are, a dead fictional character with no voice. Following this outline are only some examples of the total illegality of legal name fraud, where a legal name, any all fictional legal entity formations, references, non-living paper constructs exist nowhere in any living, conscious form outside of the confines of a dead legal reality where one must speak or spell it, id, into existence for it, id to exist at all, kind of like Mickey Mouse. It's just a concept. Is a fictional character reality that only exists in the minds of those that create said fictional characters, be they in human, sentient, consciously aware form or any other inanimate, lifeless form, assumed presumed as living mental quantum, and can only exist between two parties in order for them to exist at all. If we don't both agree that Mickey Mouse is real, he definitely is not. And whereas the original fundamental nature construct of the treaty contract agreements has been altered, changed, fraudulent, and misleading intent by one or more contracting parties, and where intent to commit fraud, to deceive another, acting as frauds, liars, thieves, etc. at all, criminal evil intentions hiding behind legal names, titles, is exposed by the very use of any all of these legalities, not reality, fictional constructs, that renders any all users of such things a felon criminal by deliberately deceptive design, and where I, the living in creation, am not, nor will I be assumed and or presumed henceforth and forever a dead legal name, title, identity, ad infinitum, ab initio, nunc pro tunc pro nunc. 1. Legal name, title, construct party claiming any all legal name is third party interloping and on the birth certificate contract between Crown agent and male female wards of admiralty, mom and dad, or the legally enslaved child, i.e. the current legal name's identity user third party interloper unknowingly was not present at the sinning of birth certificate fraud, of said birth certificate contract, the sins of the father, nor were any details of this intent to commit fraud disclosure given to contracting parties, all participants. Full disclosure is required for any all contracts, meeting of the minds, where a child and or children are involved. In short, the one using the legal name wasn't there at the sinning of the contract, guilty of the original sin signed of by the father, null and void, nunc pro tunc, contracting with the minor ensues, Clausula Rebus Sic Stantibus is invoked, spoken, written. 2. Legal name, title, construct, participant is immediately guilty within the constructs of the legal unreality of Crown copyright infringement, where the Crown does not prosecute, meaning does not pursue deliberately, for the only purpose of the continuation of humanity's overall fraud, which is far more profitable. In accordance with the warnings placed on various birth certificates, if it's on one contract construct, it's on all contracts constructs. I break this down in another video and lay out all what everything on a long form actually means. If it's on one contract construct, it's on all contracts constructs. Based in the same non-reality of legality is not reality, delusion, different in form, identical in conceptual intent, Clausula Rebus Sic Stantibus, and in subsequent certificates, aliases created by any and all parties that use said birth certificate, proof of intent to commit fraud by its very existence, to create any all forms of identification from it and or any all related forms rendering said user an immediate fraud for doing so, where any all creation of any all forms of legal identification and any all legal definitions where this legal name's fraud is deemed mandatory by, for, of, in the legal fictional reality construct, agents, practitioners thereof, where force, coercion, deception, threats, thefts, blackmail, etc. at all, police, judges, and others, is used to knowingly, unknowingly, by, of, for, and omission commission to enslave any all humanity partaking in this, the, any all legal realms of fictional delusions where the legal system demands humanity commit fraud in order to survive as if one is presently, was formerly using any all such said legal identification where the fundamental nature of the birth certificate is to create fraudulent parties on both sides of the contract. In short, a license to kill, steal, cheat, etc. at all, any all individuals as its primary intent, Clausula Rebus Sic Stantibus is invoked, spoken, written. 3. It is illegal to aid and abet anyone knowingly, unknowingly, that is fully unaware of the legal name's fraud, deception into a criminal activity against their wishes by forcefully, in any all ways, includes trickery, violent actions, threats thereof to comply with fraud, means of wording, deceptions, etc. at all, being assumed, presumed a dead legal name, identity, where following orders by any all crown agents is assumed presumed authority based on deceptive, violent means and measures to gain such fictional jurisdiction control over another, and by any all means of deceptions where the intent to deceive another is self-evident by the very nature of legal names fraud, original intent by design by one who is titled, uniformed in any all legal senses, legal unreality definitions where their role to act in the character of any all crown agents for the purpose of legal deceptions, aka commissioned officers, as the basis of their job's roles, and namely a uniformed officer, robed judge, etc. wears the emperor's clothes removed, their intent to do so, i.e. the very clothes, uniforms, robes, chains of office, etc. were to don any all robes, legal garments of the legal reality, deems crown agents easily visible and absolutely transparent by, of, for, in the intent to commit fraud, aid and abet fraud, in the very act to don them. Clausula Rebus Sic Stantibus is invoked, spoken, written. 4. Profiting from criminal activity, employment, shares, profits, investments, sales, any all means procuring legal fiat currencies, etc. Inasmuch as any all commerce is based totally and utterly, utters of life, humanity's milk and honey, on the legal name, title, fraud, construct, from the creation of fiat currencies based on the valuations of the slave trading bonds, UCC, UPU, aka a corporation of the City of London State, Corporation of Vatican City State, separation of church and state, huh? Interesting. That the birth certificate is, and intended to be, for just such a purpose, to involve every form of money made, be it through peaceful and or criminal activities, from being paid to deliver newspapers, to being paid to legally murder another human being under the legal umbrella of war military, where murder in any form is murder, and any all associations to, by, for, of, in, any all legal names, titles, forms, renders one guilty by association, absolute, inasmuch as one is still mentally, physically, spiritually bound in the legal reality, unreality, deal with the devil, Satan, by agreement to be so involved in this criminal activity. I don't associate with murderers, idol worshipping at any all levels, nor will I be assumed, presumed otherwise, via legal name fraud, associations, assumptions, presumptions, and the legal sorcery practitioners therein. Clausula Rebus Sic Stantibus is invoked, spoken, written. 5. Any all individuals that use, claim to be, actively participate in, of, by, for the legal names, titles, in any all ways whatsoever without explicit permission by their illusional legal masters, aka bar card, crown agent, sworn oath members, are practicing legal law, which is legal, not lawful, without a license, but are deemed to be practicing law, using legal commerce, anything in day-to-day living reality, where the legal name is a legal definition within the confines of the legal reality, unreality, where lawyers are used to fill this gap in the illusion of legal representation that renders any all who do so silenced, without voice, and are invoiced accordingly as a word of admiralty, or essentially a child of the dead corporate, body-consumed phonetically state, until such guilt by legal name association is removed by the one being deemed to practice law sorcery, literally, by not using a lawyer to keep the court in honor, where now contempt of court is enacted upon any all who enter a court of man-made law, which places the crown agents, court officials in peril of dishonor, where only the confession of the one entering, thinking they actually need to be there at all to be a legal name, or tricked into claiming anything that resembles, in part and or in full, anything that can bind them to the birth certificate contract spellings as they appear on said birth certificate that will ultimately render the user as a felon fraud first, thus restoring the illusion of honor in their court, where the ruse is perpetuated anon. Clausula Rebus Sic Stantibus is invoked, spoken, written. These are just a few of the examples that anyone with any sense of legal wrongdoing can see to illustrate clearly the absolute fraud nature of the entire legal system and the basis of the fraud against humanity it is based upon, where the legal name title claims are the cornerstone that holds the entire pyramid construct, with the criminals, legal sorcerers, atop the pyramid of delusional and illusional power, and where any all cops, judges, lawyers, common people should have a basic understanding of what fraud is, where fraud is clearly defined in the Ten Commandments motif. Fraud, entire legal reality, includes but not limited to murder, stealing, raping, adultering, greed, lust, covetousness, false idol creation and worship, and all manner of evil intentions, where only the veil of a papered reality protects the evil with knowing intentions, and now you know. Ignorance removed herein, where it is incumbent with every individual to prove otherwise. Silence equates acquiescence, maxim is invoked, Clausula Rebus Sic Stantibus is invoked, spoken, written. Inasmuch as the Vatican, Corporation of Vatican City State, as commonly understood, is also complicit in this legal name title reality by virtue of legal registration, all spiritual notions of power are hereby nullified ab initio et infinitum, where Vatican City is registered, as are all nations, countries, etc., as registered crown-owned corporations that are neutered by association accordingly, where any all assumed presumed power is fully and completely destroyed by, of, in, for this legal name title complicit agreement, treaty, fraud, and is therefore complicit in this fraud against all of humanity and life itself, as are all claiming any all legal status and any all legal forms ab initio et infinitum nunc pro nunc. Any all actions made by anyone professing to be in, of, for, by any all legal name title is fraud, attempt to aid and abet fraud, where it is illegal to use, be, claim, think one is illegally defined anything. Your serve? No. The game is over, and Satan and his harlot, legal Cronus, commerce, crone, crown, lost to all games where all law was and is church-based, where court is simply a synonym for church, and the living true law was replaced with false dead legal and all road practitioners, whether court or church, serve the same dead legal reality and are rendered soul dead accordingly in the eyes, yeses, of creation. Your soul is on the line lean, while your sin signs are on the lean line, and only you can clear your debt. No Savior is coming to save you, but rather to condemn you for all of your willful crimes, now knowingly being committed by the mere virtue of you having received this, having read it or not.